welcome to another evening of frank conversation here on Hard Copy, coming to you from our studios in Abuja. I'm Maokpe Ogun Yusuf. On Sunday, the 14th of April this year, there were gatherings in both Chibok and Abuja to commemorate a decade since the abductions of over 276 girls from the government secondary school Chibok, and continue to press government for the safe return of about 82 of them still in captivity. Today, it is widely accepted that those girls were taken from their school in Chibok, but the road to that acceptance was a long and tortuous one. First, it took the government of then-President Goodluck Jonathan 19 days to admit that the abductions had happened and issue a statement on it, a delay many felt was responsible for the later difficulty encountered in rescuing the girls. Former President Obasanjo once said in an interview which he granted Bloomberg that, quote, "The president did not believe that those girls were abducted for almost 18 days. The president got the information within 12 hours of the act, and he reacted immediately. I believe those girls would have been rescued within 24 hours, maximum 48 hours. For context, the abductions happened in 2014, a year before Nigeria's general elections. An opinion around the abduction of the girls became divided as to who was truly behind the abductions and whether their motive was to get the former president, Goodluck Jonathan, out of office. On Hard Copy tonight, I speak with Mr. Reno Omokri, who was not only a former aide to President Goodluck Jonathan, but is one of those who maintains that the Chibok abductions was a conspiracy. He's also written a book on it titled Facts versus Fiction, the true story of the Jonathan years, Chibok 2015 and the conspiracies. It was published in 2017. Mr. Omokri, thank you so much for joining us this evening and welcome to Hard Copy.
Thank you for having me.
Well, 2014 for the people of Chibok and perhaps for those who served in the Jonathan government might be years that they won't forget in a hurry, but for different reasons. Now, I have always been curious to know if any of the perspectives you held then has now been changed with the benefit of hindsight 10 years on.
Well, not really. Just to be factually correct, I didn't say that the abduction itself was a conspiracy, but then the aftermath of the abduction. So the abduction, it happened, and former President Olusegun Obasanjo, if you read my book, this is someone that I have a lot of respect for. But with all due respect, he is rather mistaken, because when the abduction happened, there was a National Security Council meeting that was called in the same, within, I think, a framework of about 24 hours. So to say that nothing was done for 18 days is not accurate. A lot was done. And as a government, when things like that happen, you don't just rush to the media, because you're dealing with abductors, you're dealing with kidnappers. And if you say the wrong thing to the media, they might just take actions, into their own hands that you might not appreciate. If you recall, I think it was about maybe 8 months before that abduction, we had another abduction of I think it was an Italian and a Briton. And the government spoke and the government took action. And what happened? Those 2 people that were abducted were killed. Even with British special forces, coming into the mix, they were killed. So the federal government then took action. And when I say that there was a conspiracy after the event, what I mean is that if you look at someone like Michelle Obama, for example, Michelle Obama, she came up with that sign, "Bring Back Our Girls," made it very popular. But behind the scene, the then U.S. administration was making it very difficult for the federal government to be able to do anything. I spoke with several people who were in the room with President Obama, members of his National Security Council. It's in my book, and so I've got facts to back this up. But in the public, I think maybe we were to blame on that regard. We did not really feed the media very much with what we were doing because of our experience when Lamonedara and the other, the Britons, were kidnapped in the Northwest.
Well, Mr. Omokri, I think that perspectives are allowed to shift 10 years on, but I do remember somebody who was in the media back then as to the conspiracies that were the order of the day then, people doubting if that abduction took place, people asking questions such as how is it possible that a truck will come, or how many trucks are going to be taking 276 girls in the dead of the night and a government will not be aware. etc., etc. There were questions, there were many questions around that time, and it would seem that politics trumped the safety of those girls at that particular time. How would you say that those kinds of conversations hindered the rescue of those girls? Because you have also admitted that it took a while for the government to acknowledge to the media, who communicate in turn to the Nigerian people, that such an abduction had happened.
Well, here's the thing. Whenever you have a first, whenever you have a pioneer, whenever you have, like a groundbreaking event, you're going to have conspiracies. This was the first major abduction of its kind in Nigeria at that time. And, it was a new thing. We had all of these people coming into Nigeria from Libya. They were able to get, help from Al-Qaeda. And, they were mobilized. They were very organized. So it was a strange thing to us. So a lot of people doubted it, but not the government in power at that time. Now, I cannot speak to all those who doubted it, people who probably maybe supported the administration, but I can only speak to what the former president did at that time. We accepted that the abduction happened. Now, you got to remember that at that time, Borno State, where the abduction happened, was under the control, under the management, under the government of an opposition party, now the governing party, the All Progressive Congress. And so there was, a situation where a lot of Nigerians are not aware of this, but if you look at the Nigerian Constitution, secondary education is under the purview of state governments. So the security of secondary schools are actually under the state government. Now, if a lot of people, if they want to read my book, they are going to recall, and I put the letter there, the current minister of the Federal Capital Territory, Nyesom Wike, was then Minister of State for Education. He wrote a letter to the Borno State government saying to them, do not have these exams in Chibok. Chibok is not safe. Now, he also wrote similar letters to the Adamawa State government and the Yobe State government. Now, for reasons best known to them, and this is not because they wanted it to happen. No, because it was a first, to happen. Nobody knew that such a thing was going to happen. But then the Borno State government, they felt, okay, well, this is our sphere of influence. This is our territory. The federal government cannot come in and then burden. So they went ahead to hold the exams, in Chibok, and to hold the exams on that day. What we had envisaged as the federal government of that time was that the girls were going to be all bused to the capital, Maiduguri, where the Nigerian army was better able to provide security. And then any exams were going to be held there, not just in Chibok, but other areas. But of course, the state government had to say, this is a democracy, and then we have a pyramid. The federal government cannot just come in and burden and force the state government to do what it tells them to do.
You seem to have accused politicians then of being behind this particular abductions. You were not very kind to President Buhari, and you actually labeled yourself the Buhari tormentor, and they have since, they did experience, as you rightly pointed out, quite a number of abductions. When you look at, also the doubts that, trailed that with the inquiry launched by then President's wife, Mrs. Patience Jonathan, trying to find out what exactly had happened, the famous There Is God incident. When you put all of that into context, how do you think that the political thinking, really derailed what would have happened, assuming security was just a concern?
When you have the force, when you have a pioneer, when you have something that is groundbreaking, then people start to have their learning curve from there. So you talked about Buniyadi. Look, I did my National Youth Service Corps in Yobe State. Before Buniyadi, there had been multiple instances whereby, before they were called Boko Haram, they were called Kwanta Kwanta. That was their nickname, Kwanta Kwanta. Kwanta Kwanta had been doing this in Yobe State particularly. They've been doing this even under the military, under General Abacha. So it was not a new thing. What was new was the abduction, the mass abduction. That's new. So now let's just accept that as a fact. So that was what was new. Now, I never accused politicians of being behind the abduction. So my book is there, and a book is a settled document. You can always go back to the book and look at what I said. What I said is that there were conspiracies after the incidents. For example, a number of governors at that time had gone to the White House, and this is before the abduction, and they had experienced, they had actually talked about their disillusionment with the government of Nigeria, and that they wanted, some regime change. So obviously, when such a thing happens, people are going to politicize it. But I'm not saying that they were behind it.
I'm just trying to understand the political angle to this? Because only recently, well, maybe not so recently, prior to the 2023 elections, you had made reference when the candidate of the APC, now President Bola Tinubu, had picked Vice President Shettima as his running mate. You made reference in a tweet, not to your book now, to the fact that, can't you see that this was planned all along? This Bring Back Our Girls thing was planned all along. Who was the governor of Reno at the time when the Chibok kidnappings happened? So in your perspective, what would you say was the connect between political leaders at that time, even the APC, which has just formed at that time as well, and the abductions in Chibok?
I don't think there was any connection with the abduction, and the tweet that you just referred to does not say that. In that post, I said that there was a connection between the then governor and then becoming deputy under Bola Tinubu and the Bring Back Our Girls protest. Don't forget, Bring Back Our Girls only came after the abduction. So we got to we got to distinguish between the abduction and Bring Back Our Girls. So Bring Back Our Girls was just a political movement. I'm going to just go back, maybe some people have forgotten. It was started by Hadiza Bala Usman and Obi Ageli Ezekwesili. And then at that time, just as you rightly mentioned, the APC had just been formed. It had just been founded. And Obi Ezekwesili was actually called as the first keynote speaker when they had their first, I think it was first summit. She was called as a keynote speaker. Events have since come out. Some of our own, let's say, acolytes have even accused her that she wanted to be the Minister of Finance under that administration. Now, I'm not the one making this allegation. It is her own former acolytes that she quarreled with. And then we saw what happened, Hadiza Bala Usman, later on, she became the chairman of the NPA under the Buhari administration. So obviously, I think it was 3 months after the abduction, the then chairman of the All Progressive Congress, Mr. Audu, said on video, and I can show you that video, if you don't have it, that the Bring Back Our Girls campaign founded by members of our party. I'm quoting him. This is a direct quote. Now, the next day he apologized because there was a big sting on social media, which now went to the traditional media and then the print media. But he did say so. And it's very easy to apologize and say he didn't mean it, but we have his words. So in that regard, that's what I was talking about in that post. And I also
okay, so the Bring Back Our Girls movement, which is still in existence, by the way, to today, and, fell out in a very spectacular way with the let's say the Buhari administration, after they believed that the Buhari administration had not shown sufficient zeal to bring back those girls. Would you still say that it was fair to have tagged them as a political group at the time, especially when you look at the fact that a number of them are still very much in the movement, have established links with the parents of these people, are still one of the strongest advocates for the return of the remaining girls still in abduction? With benefit of hindsight, haven't they proven that they were not exactly a political group from the start?
Well, that's not factual, If anybody is the strongest advocate for the Chibok girls, it's going to be me. It's not going to be the Bring Back Our Girls people. Because when I go around the world meeting world leaders for Nia Sharibu, I also bring up the matter of the Chibok girls. Now, to be factual, the quarrel with the Muhammadu Buhari administration did not happen until after 6 months when Muhammadu Buhari announced his cabinet. And then he appointed some members of the Bring Back Our Girls community to his cabinet, and then he did not appoint some others. So those who were not appointed became disappointed, disillusioned, and then that, a famous fallout happened. But it did not happen in the 6 months when Muhammadu Buhari did not have a government. So you can see that they were expectant, and then they were disappointed, and it was sour grapes. It was not something that they were doing from the bottom of their hearts.
But when you look at how the Buhari government itself also handled abductions much later, which wasn't also very different, can you really say that that group was a group of political acolytes of the then government?
Yes, I'm going to say that because I'm not talking about, I see, I have a master's in law, and so because of that, even when I'm excited, I am very, very, very aware of the words that I choose to use. Now, I'm not talking about rank and file members. It's just like, for instance, if you have a secret society, just like maybe the Freemasons, they operate on a pyramid model. The people at the top know the real agenda. The people at the bottom do not know the real agenda, and so they just follow along. When I talk about Bring Back Our Girls, I'm talking about the people who brought it into being. Now, having said that, some of them have actually turned their lives around and they've actually redeemed themselves. And because of that, I respect them.
Well, I'm just a little curious because now you currently support the president and you support the president and his policies. I mean, you have been, right now, you usually use the hashtag Mr. Table Shaker. And I'm wondering, a lot of your tweets are in support of, whatever it is the president is doing, oftentimes maybe against also the obedient, who are like a fallout from the PDP, because Mr. Peter Obi used to be a member of the PDP. I don't know, does that make you a member of the APC as well?
Of course it doesn't, but this is what Benjamin Franklin said, because to be a member of a party, you got to be either a card-carrying member of that party or to be so aligned with that party that the party has introduced you into their government. I was appointed under a People's Democratic Party government. Now, if you recall, Benjamin Franklin, the first Secretary of State of the United States, said that true patriotism is supporting your country all the time and supporting its government when they deserve it. When the Tinubu administration does something that deserves my praise, I'm going to praise them. I'm not just going to start allowing social media critics to dictate my stance. If they do something that I support, I will praise them. The same thing, if you go back, and I please encourage you to fact check me, I praised General Muhammadu Buhari 17 times publicly. Look, if you look at the manifesto of the People's Democratic Party and our candidate at that time, of which I was part of the people that put that together, we said that if we got into power, we were going to float the currency and end multiple exchange rate. We also said that we were also going to remove fuel subsidy. We said that we were going to introduce student loans. All of these things are things that the current administration is doing. Now, it's going to be hypocritical of me to see them doing things that I felt are good for the country, and then I start to attack them. I will praise them. Now, let's talk about security, for instance. Now, I told you that the worst period for security under this for this country was during the 8 wasteful years of Muhammadu Buhari, and I gave instances. But look at what's happening under the Tinubu administration. We had Ali Kachala, who was terrorizing Niger State. We had Boderi, who was terrorizing Kaduna State, and then we had Sani Dangote, who was terrorizing Zamfara and Jigawa State. All of these bandit leaders have been killed by this administration. Killed. In 8 years, Buhari did not kill one. And then this administration has killed 3 of these terrible bandit leaders. They've reduced instances of insecurity. You can now travel from Abuja to Kaduna safely. People go on that route. This year, throughout this year, we are in the 4th month of this year, about to enter the 5th month, there has not been one instance of abduction of travelers on that route. So yes, if things are happening well, I'm going to praise them. When the president went to, I believe he was in Paris, France, and then there was an abduction that happened in Nigeria. Go back and fact check me. I criticized the president. I said, you've got to come back to Nigeria. You can't be in France and then this kind of thing happens. So I'm not going to be just one person that is just going to take a stance and be attacking and attacking and attacking. If I see something being done right, I will praise. If I see something being done wrong, I will condemn.
Which ought to be the stance of every Nigerian, and which supposed to be the stance of every Nigerian, which neither makes them members of political party or people who are against political parties. I know that, this particular statement is certainly going to be the subject of, many controversies, Mr. Reno Omokri. But I want to quickly ask you whether, with benefit of hindsight, when you look at the events of 2014, 10 years on, do you think that the Jonathan government could have done anything differently, which perhaps might have changed the outcomes which we, witnessed after the abductions happened in Chibok? Well,
I think so. I mean, it's very, very, let's say, not very prudent for you, with the benefit of hindsight, not to improve yourself. So if I had been present at that time, what I would have done is that after the federal government wrote a letter to the Borno State government asking that exams should not hold at Chibok, when the Borno State government, when they refused and when they refused to abide by that letter, if I had been present, I would have just gone, and maybe it would have been considered extra constitutional, but we're trying to save lives. I would have actually just gone and then forcefully intervened and bused those students to Maiduguri, and not just in Chibok, other outlying towns. That is one thing that we would have done, to prevent the incident. Then after the incident happened, another thing that we should have done is that after the incident happened, there was this, would I say, prevarication among the military, the National Security Council at that time. We knew where the girls were. Should we, just send in paratroopers, send in special forces and try to rescue them? I think probably if I had been present at that time, I would have said, okay, you know what? There might be some deaths, but we do not know what's going to happen. So I would have really just approved a military action. But then, like I said, you take a decision when you're president. The worst leader is a person who does not take any decision. As a leader, you can be forgiven if you take a bad decision. You cannot be forgiven if you take no decision. And former President Jonathan took a decision which right now, some people will say was bad, other people will say it's good. We're just going to leave it for history to judge.
What was the decision he took?
The decision he took was that two things. There was not going to be a military invasion of the forest, and also there was not going to be ransom payments made to Boko Haram. And I remember he was saying this privately to us, that if the federal government pays ransom to get these girls back, what's going to happen is that these abductions will just keep on happening and happening and happening, because we are going to create another new industry. And what we are trying to prevent, we are actually going to make it worsen.
Well, just before we go, one of the other issues which the Jonathan government had to contend with is the issue of corruption. And the Buhari administration said they were going to come and, fight corruption. It was one of the pillars upon which they, campaigned. I think the jury is still out as to how well they did or not. There's been total silence on that on the part of President Tinubu, even though it will appear that he's been trying to take some steps in that direction. For a country that has battled corruption for so long, what steps would you say that Nigeria needs to do to change the tide, especially around the perception that we're not doing enough to combat corruption?
I'm so glad that you mentioned that word perception, because here's the thing. Now, the thing about perception is that you're talking about perception, and perception is not for your government. Perception is actually what other people, principally the international community, think about you. If you read the annual the Corruption Perception Index of Transparency International, the center of corruption, at least that's what the international community believes, is no longer with the government per se, it's now with regulators. Nigerian regulators are now perceived as being the most corrupt part of the Nigerian government, because they are not seen to be doing their job. And I'm going to give you an example. If you look at a company like maybe the MTN, they are meant to be regulated by the Nigerian Communications Commission. Now, the Nigerian Communications Commission, they had an executive vice chairman. He finished his tenure. After finishing his tenure, what did he do? He immediately left NCC and became the chairman of the board of MTN. Now, I want to ask you a question. How can the NCC now effectively police MTN when the former head of the NCC, who employed a lot of the directors, a lot of the regulators, is now the chairman of the board of MTN? Not just that, you have the Federal Inland Revenue Service, whose mandate is to make sure that people pay their taxes, and if they don't pay their taxes, they are prosecuted. You had Ifweko Omokri, Okaro, who was the chairman of the Federal Inland Revenue Service. She finished her tenure and then went from being the chairman of the Federal Inland Revenue Service to becoming a board member of MTN. Now, how is the Federal Inland Revenue Service going to be able to regulate MTN properly and make sure that they pay the right taxes when their former head is now on the board of MTN? This is a person who appointed directors, appointed regulators there. Also, you have a former Minister of Information Technology who set Nigeria's policy for IT, leaving that office and then going to become a member of the board of MTN. Not just that, a former chairman of the Nigerian Bar Association becoming a board member of MTN. Now, that is the kind of thing that affects Nigeria's Corruption Perception Index and makes the world think that, look, we are a joke when it comes to fighting corruption. Because you cannot have, it's just going to be like the governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria finishing his tenure and then going to become the chairman of a bank. That is where we need to fight corruption. We need to clean up our regulatory agencies, because right now they are a cesspool. Maybe They might think that they are not corrupt, but the rest of the world think that they are corrupt. And until we fix that, we're not going to get the kind of foreign direct investment that we are looking for. Now, another thing I need to say is, according to Transparency International, which is the only body in the world allowed to adjudicate countries and say who is corrupt and who is not corrupt, the Jonathan administration was by far less corrupt than the Muhammadu Buhari administration. Under Jonathan, Nigeria improved by 12 places in the Corruption Perception Index. Under Buhari, we went back 14 places. So, I mean, you can just see, if they say they came to fight corruption, look, the last 8 years were the most corrupt that Nigeria has ever been.
Well, at this point, I have to say thank you very much for coming on Hard Copy this today. Thank you so much for your time with us today.
And thank you for such a lively communication. Woo, you are thirsty.
Well, for the perspective of the founders of the Bring Back Our Girls movement on how the doubts trailing the abduction of the girls affected them individually and as a movement, do watch my colleague Kayla's interview with Bukola Shonibare on Political Paradigm on Tuesday at 2 p.m. and at 11 p.m. That's the program tonight. But we always want to hear from you, so please speak to us using the handles showing on your screen. Thank you for watching. I'm Maokwe Ogun Yusuf. Good night.